When I look back at my life, there's one story that keeps circling in my head like a restless crow. I've lived through my share of mistakes, burned bridges, and half-forgotten dreams, but nothing compares to the storm that began the night I met her. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and still hear the echo of her laughter, see the way her lips curved when she wanted something from me. And believe me, she always wanted something. It was a late autumn evening in Chicago, and the city had that restless chill that sneaks into your bones. I had been working long hours at the firm, chasing the kind of success I thought would make me feel less hollow. Instead, I ended up at a dimly lit bar a few blocks from the office, nursing a whiskey that burned more than it comforted. That's when she walked in, Elena. She wasn't just beautiful. Plenty of women are beautiful. No, she carried herself like someone who knew the room belonged to her before she even stepped through the door. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, her dress was simple but elegant, and her eyes, sharp, gray, watchful, moved with a kind of calculation I didn't recognize at first. She saw me before I saw her, and by the time she slid onto the stool next to mine, I was already caught. "Rough day?" she asked, voice low, a little playful. I don't remember what I answered. Something forgettable, I'm sure. What I do remember is how quickly she made me feel seen, as if all the weight of my unspoken frustrations could be laid bare under her gaze. It's a dangerous thing to be understood too quickly, especially by a stranger. But I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about how long it had been since someone looked at me like that. The drinks kept coming, the conversation deepened. She told me she worked in art, gallery curation, she said, though the way she spoke about it made me wonder if that was the full truth. There was always something half-hidden behind her words, like she wanted to show me just enough to keep me chasing. And chase I did. By the end of the night, we were walking together through the quiet streets, the city lights painting our faces in yellow and blue. I didn't invite her back to my apartment, though the thought crossed my mind 100 times. Instead, she stopped under a flickering street lamp, leaned in close, and whispered, "Maybe next time." Next time came sooner than I expected. She started appearing in places I frequented, sometimes by chance, sometimes, I later realized, by design. A coffee shop near the office. A gallery opening my colleagues dragged me to. Always the same spark in her eyes, the same mixture of warmth and mystery that left me wanting more. It wasn't long before we became inseparable. At least, that's how it felt to me. She had this way of drawing me out of myself, making me laugh when I was buried in work, reminding me of the version of me I'd almost forgotten. The man who dreamed, who wanted, who believed in something more than paychecks and promotions. She made me feel alive again. But there were cracks, even in those early days. She avoided talking about her past, brushed off questions about her family, changed the subject whenever I pressed too hard. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Everyone has secrets, right? And who was I to judge when I wasn't exactly opening every door to my own history? Still, something in me kept tugging at the loose threads she left behind. The nights she disappeared without explanation. The calls she silenced the second they lit up her phone. The way her smile faltered when she thought I wasn't looking. I ignored it. Or maybe I wanted to believe the fantasy too much to risk breaking it. Because being with Alina was intoxicating, and I was addicted. One evening, months after that first meeting, she invited me over to her apartment for the first time. It was smaller than I expected, cluttered with stacks of books, half-finished canvases, and the faint smell of turpentine. There was something raw about the place, like a glimpse into a side of her she usually kept hidden. I remember tracing my fingers along a painting leaning against the wall, dark, abstract swirls of red and black that felt almost violent. "Don't look at that one," she said sharply, and for a second her voice wasn't playful at all. It was hard, defensive. Then, just as quickly, she softened, smiled, kissed me, and the moment slipped away. But it stayed with me. The painting, the sharpness in her tone, the glimpse of something deeper, darker beneath the surface. If I had trusted that instinct, maybe things would have turned out differently. maybe I wouldn't be sitting here years later, replaying every detail like a man trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces never quite fit. But I didn't. I fell harder. And by the time the betrayal came, the kind that makes your chest tighten even decades later, it was far too late to turn back. The night it all started to unravel, I remember the taste of red wine more vividly than anything else. Alina had insisted we celebrate. She didn't say what for, only that she had good news, though she left it dangling like bait on a hook. I arrived at her apartment to find candles lit, music playing low, and her packing restlessly with a half-empty glass already in her hand. When she finally told me, her voice carried that intoxicating blend of pride and secrecy. "I've been offered something big," she said. "A partnership, a chance to take my work to another level." I congratulated her, but something in her tone didn't quite match the words. She wasn't just excited, she was triumphant, as if she'd won a battle I didn't even know she'd been fighting. I asked questions: who offered it, what kind of partnership, what did it mean for us? But her answers danced around the edges. The more I pressed, the more evasive she became, until the wine dulled my suspicion, and I let myself be pulled into her embrace. In those moments it was easy to believe, to forget the unease building in my chest, to surrender to the illusion that love was enough. But illusions have a way of shattering, and it doesn't take much: a misplaced word, a chance encounter, or, in my case, a name. It happened a week later. I was in line at a cafe near her apartment, waiting for my coffee, when I heard her laugh. That unmistakable laugh, low and magnetic, that had hooked me from the very start. I turned, expecting to see her walk in, but she was already there, seated by the window with a man I had never seen before. They sat close, too close, her hand brushing his arm as she leaned in to whisper something that made him grin. He wasn't just a friend, I could tell that instantly. The intimacy in their posture, the familiarity of their silence, it told a story words couldn't hide. I didn't approach. I couldn't. My body froze while my mind spun. I left before she noticed me, clutching my coffee like it might anchor me to the ground. That image, her smile meant for someone else, seared itself into me. I told myself to wait, to ask her, to give her the chance to explain. But when I confronted her that evening, the storm that erupted only deepened my doubts. "Who was he?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked, then gave a dismissive shrug. "Just a colleague. Why?" "You were laughing with him, touching him." Her eyes narrowed, lips tightening into that dangerous smile she wore when cornered. "Are you spying on me now?" "It's not spying if you're sitting in public," I snapped. "I just want the truth." The silence that followed was worse than any denial. She held my gaze for what felt like hours, then finally sighed, exasperated. "You're imagining things. If you don't trust me, maybe you shouldn't be here." It cut deeper than she knew, because the truth was I didn't trust her, not fully, not anymore. But I also couldn't leave. Love, or what I thought was love, bound me to her like a chain I couldn't break. Over the next weeks the cracks widened. She grew more secretive, vanishing for hours with no explanation, her phone glued to her hand. I started noticing inconsistencies in her stories, small details that didn't add up. A gallery showing she claimed to attend, yet no mention of her name on the program. A late meeting that ended with her smelling faintly of cologne I didn't wear. I wanted proof, not for revenge, not even for justice, just to quiet the gnawing suspicion that kept me awake at night. So one evening, when she stepped out to take a call, I did something I never thought myself capable of. I opened her sketchbook, the one she always guarded like a locked diary. What I found wasn't art, not in the traditional sense. Page after page filled with names, numbers, fragments of notes written in a hurried hand, addresses, meeting dates, and tucked between two pages a photograph, grainy, clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. The subject was me. My breath caught. I stared at the image, my own face frozen mid-step, unaware I was being watched. The notes beside it mentioned places I'd been, people I'd met. It wasn't art, It was surveillance. When she returned, I was sitting there with the book open on my lap, my hands shaking. Her eyes darted from the pages to my face, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't mask her expression. Panic flashed across her features. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. "Then what the hell is it, Alina?" My voice cracked under the weight of confusion and betrayal. "Why do you have this?" She closed the distance between us quickly, pressing her hands to mine, her voice suddenly tender, desperate. "It's not what you think. Please just trust me." But how could I? How could anyone, after staring at proof that the woman they loved had been watching them like a subject in an experiment? That night she begged me not to leave. She kissed me like it was the last time, clung to me like a drowning woman. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I stayed. I told myself I needed answers, that I couldn't walk away without knowing the full truth. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I wasn't ready to let her go, not yet. And that decision, more than anything else, would come back to destroy me. For weeks after discovering that sketchbook, I lived in a haze of half-truths and paranoia. Alina's presence in my life became both a balm and a wound. She still smiled at me the way she always had, still reached for my hand in crowded rooms, still whispered my name like it was something sacred. But I couldn't forget that photograph. Couldn't forget the notes scrawled next to my movements, as if my life were a puzzle she was trying to solve. I told myself I'd confront her again, demand a full explanation, but every time I tried, she disarmed me with her softness. She had a gift for turning suspicion into guilt, for making me feel like the unfaithful one simply for doubting her. "You see shadows where there aren't any," she'd say, pressing her lips to my temple. "You're hurting yourself with these thoughts." But then the shadows began to move on their own. One night long after midnight, I woke to find her gone. Her side of the bed still warm, her phone missing from the nightstand. I tried to tell myself she was restless, maybe couldn't sleep, maybe had stepped out for air. But when an hour passed, then two, dread sank its teeth into me. I pulled on my coat and left the apartment, heart pounding, not even sure what I was searching for. The streets were quiet, the city asleep, but as I turned a corner near the river, I saw her. Alina, standing beneath a lamppost, speaking to a man I recognized instantly, the same man from the cafe. They stood too close, heads bent together, voices low. I couldn't hear the words, but the tension between them was unmistakable. She wasn't laughing this time. She looked serious, even frightened. The man touched her arm and she flinched, pulling back as if burned. I should have called out, should have demanded the truth right there in the open. But fear rooted me in place. Fear of what I might hear, of what I already knew but didn't want to face. So I watched from the shadows like a coward until she finally turned and walked away, leaving him staring after her. When she slipped back into bed an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. She curled against me, her breath steady, her body warm, and I lay there frozen, wondering how many lies had been whispered into my ear in that very position. The next morning I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I saw you," I said, voice rough, "by the river with him." For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she sat up, hair falling around her face, and said quietly, "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," I shot back. She looked at me with those gray eyes that had once seemed bottomless, now unreadable. "He's not what you think. None of this is." "That doesn't mean anything, Alina." Her hands trembled as she reached for mine, but I pulled away. And in that silence, something in her broke. She began to cry, not the delicate tears of a woman seeking comfort, but guttural, shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. I wanted to hold her, but I forced myself to stay still. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "I never meant for you to be part of this, I swear. You were supposed to stay outside of it. But then I met you," and she cut herself off, burying her face in her hands. "Part of what?" I demanded. But she didn't answer. Instead, she begged me to trust her one more time, to give her space, to let her handle it. And against all reason, against every flashing warning in my head, I agreed, because the thought of losing her felt worse than the uncertainty of keeping her. Days bled into weeks. I tried to live as if nothing had changed, but suspicion ate at me. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking, searched her drawers for more notebooks, even followed her once when she claimed she had a late meeting. But she was clever, always one step ahead, always covering her tracks. And then came the night that shattered the fragile facade. I arrived at her apartment to surprise her, flowers in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. The door was unlocked, which was unusual, and the apartment was dimly lit. I stepped inside quietly, almost sheepishly, rehearsing some playful remark. But the words died in my throat when I heard voices, two of them, hers and his. I froze in the hallway, every nerve on fire, listening as their muffled conversation drifted through the closed bedroom door. I couldn't catch everything, but fragments sliced through the air like knives. He doesn't know. Too dangerous. I can't keep this up. And then the sound of her sobbing again, followed by his voice, calm, coaxing, like a man used to holding power. The flowers slipped from my hand, petals scattering across the floor. I felt sick, betrayed, yet paralyzed. For a long moment I considered bursting through that door, demanding answers. But I didn't. Instead, I backed away, silent as a thief, and left the apartment without them ever knowing I had been there. That was the night something inside me changed. Love, once so blinding, began to curdle into obsession. I couldn't let her go, couldn't keep her close, couldn't trust her, couldn't stop wanting her. I was caught in a web I didn't understand, and every struggle only tightened the threads. And somewhere deep down, a voice whispered the truth I wasn't ready to face. Alina's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was bigger, more dangerous, and I was already in too deep to escape unscathed. I didn't sleep the night I heard their voices through her bedroom door. I wandered the streets until dawn, clutching the bottle of wine I'd never opened, the flowers now limp in a trash can somewhere on Michigan Avenue. I replayed every word, every gesture, every unexplained absence, trying to weave them into something coherent. But all I had were jagged pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. By morning, exhaustion turned into a kind of grim determination. I told myself I needed the truth, not fragments. I couldn't go on living in limbo, caught between her touch and her secrets. So I made a decision I never thought I'd make. If Alina wouldn't tell me what was happening, I'd find out myself. The following week, I began watching her as carefully as she once watched me. I memorized her routines, the places she went, the names she dropped in passing. I even skipped work to follow her across the city, keeping just far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. It felt pathetic, shameful, but necessity outweighed pride. One evening, I trailed her to a hotel on the outskirts of downtown. She was dressed in a way I'd never seen before, dark coat, hair tied back, no trace of her usual flair. She slipped inside through a side entrance, glancing over her shoulder with a wariness that made my stomach twist. I waited nearly an hour before she emerged. She wasn't alone. The same man from the cafe, the river, her apartment, he walked beside her, their heads bent close, their conversation hushed but intense. I ducked behind a parked car, watching as they climbed into a black sedan that pulled away into the night. I wanted to follow, but my courage faltered. Instead, I noted the hotel, the time, the details. I felt like a detective in my own life, chasing answers that only led to more questions. Days later, while she was in the shower, I searched her purse. My hands shook as I rifled through lipstick, receipts, scraps of paper until I found it. A key card for the same hotel. Tucked behind it, a folded envelope with no name, no return address, just a thick wad of cash. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. She simply stared at me, expression unreadable, then said, "You shouldn't have looked." "Then tell me what this is," I demanded, my voice breaking. "Tell me the truth, Alina." But she shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I can't, not yet." Not yet, I snapped. What the hell does that mean? It means, she whispered, gripping my face between her trembling hands, that if I tell you now, I'll lose you. And if I lose you, none of this will matter. Her words struck me harder than any confession could have, because in that moment I realized she loved me, or at least she believed she did. The way her body shook, the way her voice cracked, it wasn't performance. It was raw. And yet, it was wrapped in lies so thick I couldn't see where truth ended and deception began. I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Because I needed to know how the story ended, and because walking away felt like tearing out a piece of myself. But the tension between us became unbearable. Every touch carried suspicion. Every kiss tasted of secrets. I couldn't shake the image of her in that hotel, the envelope of cash, the man whose presence haunted every corner of our lives. And then came the night everything snapped. We were at my apartment, a rare reversal, drinking in silence that grew heavier by the minute. Finally, I slammed my glass down and said, "If you can't tell me what's going on, then maybe we're done." Her face went pale. "Don't say that." "What else am I supposed to say, Alina? You've been lying to me since the day we met. You've been." "Stop," she stood abruptly, packing like a caged animal. "You don't understand. If I tell you, you'll hate me. You'll never forgive me." "Try me." She stopped, hands balled into fists, tears streaking her cheeks. "It isn't just me. It never was. He has something over me, something I can't fight. If I walk away, if I defy him, he'll destroy me. And you." The words chilled me. Destroy me. I pressed her, but she refused to say more. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, whispering that she was trapped, that she never wanted me to be part of this. That night, for the first time, I wondered if I was in danger, not just emotionally, but physically. The notes, the surveillance, the secret meetings, it wasn't just betrayal. It was something darker, something I wasn't equipped to handle. I should have left then, should have cut ties, changed my locks, erased her number, and buried the memory. But instead, I pulled her into my arms and promised I wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Because despite everything, despite every lie, I still loved her. Or maybe I loved the version of her I thought I knew. Either way, I was in too deep. And what happened next proved just how dangerous love can be when it collides with secrets sharp enough to draw blood. I sometimes wonder if the ending was written long before I even met her, that no matter what choices I made, no matter how hard I fought to hold on, the outcome was inevitable. But back then, I still believed I had a say. I still thought I could bend the truth into something bearable. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Friday night. Alina called me, her voice shaking, urging me to meet her at the gallery where we'd first gone together months before. "Please," she whispered. "It has to be tonight. I can't do this alone anymore." When I arrived, the place was nearly empty, shadows stretching long across the marble floors. She was there, standing by one of her paintings, her coat clutched tight around her. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, fragile in a way that both broke my heart and filled me with dread. "I can't hide it anymore," she said as I approached. "You deserve to know." And then she told me, or at least enough to shatter whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. The man I'd seen her with wasn't just a colleague, wasn't just some passing figure. His name was Victor, and he wasn't part of the art world at all. He was a dealer of sorts, paintings, yes, but also information, leverage, secrets packaged and sold to the highest bidder. Years ago, when Alina was struggling to survive in the city, she'd made a deal with him. She owed him, and that debt had grown into a chain she couldn't break. The surveillance in her sketchbook, the photographs, the cash, all of it was for him. She wasn't watching me out of malice. She was being forced to. I was never supposed to be more than a mark, a piece of leverage in some larger scheme. But then she fell in love with me, or so she swore, her voice cracking as she said it. That wasn't part of the plan. That was the one thing Victor hadn't accounted for. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. But belief doesn't erase betrayal. As she wept in front of me, begging for forgiveness, All I could see were the lies that had carried us to that moment. The nights she'd vanished, the laughter meant for another man, the whispers behind closed doors. Even if her love was real, it had been born in deceit. Before I could answer, Victor himself walked into the gallery. A tall man, sharp suit, eyes like polished stone. He carried authority the way others carry weapons, and in that instant I understood the fear Alina lived under. "So this is him," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "The reason you've grown careless." I stood my ground, though my pulse hammered in my throat. "Leave her alone." He smiled faintly, as if I were a child making demands. "You don't understand, do you? She belongs to me. Every debt, every lie, every little secret she's wrapped around you, it all ties back here." Alina cried out, insisting she wouldn't do it anymore, that she was done. Victor's expression hardened. "You don't get to decide when it ends." What happened next unfolded in a blur. Alina stepped between us, her hands trembling, her voice breaking as she pleaded with him to let me go. I wanted to fight, to grab her hand and run, but fear rooted me to the spot. Victor leaned close to me then, his words quiet, deadly. "Walk away, forget her, or I promise you'll regret staying." And here's the cruelest truth. I did walk away. Not that night. I was too stunned, too tangled in her tears, but soon after. I couldn't live in a life built on lies, couldn't battle a man whose reach stretched far beyond anything I understood. Alina tried to stop me, begged me to hold on, but something in her eyes told me she knew it was over. She knew the damage couldn't be undone. The last time I saw her, she was standing in the rain outside my apartment, her hair plastered to her face, her hands clutching the same sketchbook I once found. She pressed it into my chest, whispering, "Now you'll know everything." Then she turned and walked away before I could say a word. I opened the book later that night. It was filled with names, numbers, accounts, evidence that could have destroyed Victor if I'd had the courage to use it. But I didn't. I tucked it into a drawer where it still sits to this day, untouched, a relic of the life I lost. I never saw Alina again. Rumors drifted through the city of a woman disappearing overseas, of debts paid in blood, of a man named Victor meeting an untimely end. I don't know which, if any, were true. What I do know is this: love can be a beautiful lie, and betrayal doesn't always come with clean edges. Sometimes it seeps into you, a poison you carry long after the wound has closed. Even now, when the nights are long and the silence too heavy, I catch myself listening for her laughter. And I wonder if, in some twisted way, she ever truly loved me, or if I was just another canvas she painted with secrets too dark to name. Maybe I'll never know. Maybe that's the punishment I earned for staying when I should have run. But one truth remains, carved into me deeper than any scar. Alina was both the best and worst thing that ever happened to me, and loving her was the closest I've ever come to destruction.